Hello, SoulNet listeners. Today we are in conversation about grief. This is something we all experience, but not often talk about. And so we are going back to childhood and sort of talking about what we didn't know and what we learned in our later years about feeling grief, processing it, and honoring love and loss. So thank you for being with us today.
Grief is one of those things when I reflect on it, I feel like it's a midlife emotion for me. I don't know that if that's just a time of life where we experience more grief, and we've gone through, many losses of relationships, of identities, of jobs, maybe. Like we got so many different iterations, by this time of our life. But, we maybe had small aspects of actual death, not impacted in the same ways in our younger years. I also would say that as someone who's openly shared, it took me a really long time to learn to be comfortable with my feelings, let alone acknowledge what I was actually feeling. So when I look back onto grief, how it might have showed up in my life in my earlier days, I wouldn't have named it as grief. I don't even know that I would have named it as loss. I definitely felt the physical aspects in my body. I remember, I think I shared with you, I pretty much ran away my divorce. That was part of my therapy. And I would go for these, runs, and I would cry openly and, sobbing along the seawall in West Vancouver. At the time, it was just emotion. There was no labels on that. And that was, of course, in my late 20s. And here I am now, and I've been really unpacking and learning to sit with myself when things are coming up. And it was a guide to me back then, but I didn't have the language to use it or to apply to it that I do now.
Dana, thank you for bringing this topic to the pod. I too, as a child, didn't have the language or understanding of what grief was and how to process it. When my dad left, I was 9. And I lost contact with him after that. He died when I was in my early 20s, but I didn't have a relationship with him much after 9. I only saw him a handful of times, and it was under, difficult circumstances. And I never knew that I never grieved the loss of my dad. Because, at that time, the emphasis was on the fact that my mom and dad had the marriage had broken, and there was shame.
It was big back then.
It was big back then in the 80s, but in that craziness that unfolded, I didn't grieve the loss of my dad. Even in my 20s, I didn't know to grieve that loss until I was a lot older, and I'd done a lot of work on myself and like why I had certain reactions and responses to things in my life, and why I, was a certain way, like in relationships. And I started to question. It's not until you start to go in on yourself and start to get to know yourself deeply that you start to realize, oh my God, I never did grieve that.
And this is any age and stage of life, is that if something happens in our life that we don't have the skill set or resources to kind of meet the experience, avoidance either happens or like shutdown and freezing. And you reminded me, Meg, that when my grandmother, my mom's mom, my Chinese grandmother, passed away when I was 17, I was really close to her. She was in many ways more like my mother emotionally, because I was very close to her emotionally. I was so shocked and affected by her loss, but I didn't know how to process grief. So I just froze. And kind of like what you shared, Meg, is it kind of showed up in my future relationships of how I would freeze emotionally and just be like, it's like frozen. It's frozen. And like, I don't think I really learned to process grief till my 40s after my divorce. And so I wasn't just processing the end of my marriage, I was processing everything that was unprocessed.
Me too. Unprocessed. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that we all have that same kind of experience where that in our younger years we really didn't understand what grief and loss was. We just kind of kept going.
Exactly. Kept going. Yeah. Running, like you
Yeah.
said. Well, keeping going is a like gentle
Yeah.
version of running.
Running away.
I mean, and Eilina was dancing. Like it's like you
Yeah.
you're kind of going into performative mode
Exactly. That's what I
because
yeah.
it's like I think it's a survival strategy.
Yeah. No tools.
Yeah, we didn't have tools and our parents also didn't like model very well. Like I think what happened in our society is that we be done with that.
Mhm.
Move along.
Yep.
Move along.
Yeah.
And then maybe that's where we go. We go to running and we go to, we move. It's not like processing movement. It's not internal emotional movement. It's like literal, like move along, people.
I remember the saying, "Pull yourself up by your bootstrap." I don't know how many times I heard that in my family. How about you guys?
Oh my God.
Yes.
Eileen, I actually had that in my notes for today's episode was exactly that, was just like how many, because like we put these timelines, on grief, on our losses. And we're saying like we expect people to be over it. And that's, there is no right or wrong time when you are through it or when you think you're through it, might come back again. I feel like this is where I got led astray when my younger years, because I wasn't really allowed, not only was there not a lot of room for me to feel and express, but over time, I learned to be so far removed from my feelings that having to get back to what I was actually feeling was the bulk of my work. Because I remember being asked that question, well, what are you feeling? And I'm like, I don't know. Because I was numb, or I was so, again, removed from that whole natural process that as children, we do express. It's one of the beautiful and some of the frustrating things that we go through as parents is that our kids let us know when they want something or when they're unhappy or when they're happy. Like they're just
Yeah.
transparent until they're taught or learn not to.
Exactly.
And I learned not to express over time. And so it was a really long battle to get back to what am I actually feeling?
Right. Oh my God, that's such a good point.
I think that is also the interesting part of this midlife is really like the timepiece. And, so many things as women that we going through perimenopause and menopause too, you know, these changes, right? I mean, we are no longer going to be the vessel that creates life. We're going to create other things. So there is a loss of that whole era or chapter of our lives as well, which is, I don't know if you guys have, thought a lot about that, but that definitely not so much in the more recent times, but that was a big part when my cycle started kind of being a little more, um, unavailable. I don't know what the right word is there, but I started skipping a couple, right? And I was, sporadic. And it was like, I was like, oh yeah, like this means that is not going to be an option for me anymore. Whether I wanted to or not wasn't the conversation. It was more that was a door that was closing and not necessarily of my choosing, right?
Something I've been doing recently in the last couple of years, and it's really been helpful for me, is a death meditation. I do it quite regularly where I visualize my ending, not in how it's going to go, but that I'm gone. And and it just brings up so much richness of what, like, it helps me reflect on what matters. It helps me reflect on the work I have yet to do in my time left, like just how I can offer in my relationships and just what's there to complete. It's just kind of a felt sense I get. So it's a really helpful meditation to visualize, for me anyhow, my ending, and it also helps me appreciate and have gratitude for all the different chapters. It's like it's really helped me get curious about my relationship with attachment. Where are my attachments still really like sticky and asking me to give some more exploration there? I remember when I was a kid, my parents, I think it was my dad, said there's a Chinese curse that is, may you live in the time it changes,
Oh my gosh.
right? And
Oh my gosh, my mother-in-law. Oh my God, my mother-in-law who is not Chinese. Every time I call her, she's like, I just want to remind you of that Chinese proverb because we're living in right now.
right?
Wait, can you repeat that?
May you live in a time of changes. But the truth is, that's a constant. Like it's kind of a curse to like, may you live in the time of changes, but it's true. It's a constant. Like,
It's a constant. That's exactly what my mother-in-law was saying. Like this is a Chinese like curse, but it's actually life, like as you know it. Like and so it is.
something I wanted to share around grief. I'm going to try and find the quote because it's so helpful to give it context. And I can't remember who said it, but basically that the greatest loss that we kind of keep re-experiencing in this lifetime is when we come out of the womb, and we don't know it at the time, but we spend the rest of our life kind of trying to get back to the safety and certainty of
Yeah.
the womb.
Mm.
Can I even add too, like, I find it really fascinating because I witness the body language when we are in grief. I mean, where do we go? Our shoulders roll forward. We literally roll back into the shape of
Fetal position.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And life is a series of experiences trying to recreate certainty, just like what Meg was saying about, like, we procreate, we create families, we create careers, we create relevancy for ourselves. Like, we become experts in ABC so we can finally be, liked and accepted. Like, Sally Field,
Totally.
you like me, you actually like me. When I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, we're all doing it in our own kind of distinct styles and flavors of creating that certainty. And there's no wrong or bad in it. It's just a human kind of evolutionary biology to try to create that safety and certainty that Meg was speaking of. And so the greatest grief is the loss of that womb and wherever we were before the womb that maybe had more certainty and safety. I don't know. We'll find out
When we get there
Yep.
again.
when we lose this life.
That's
Yep.
right. That's right.
It's so interesting. I, as we're talking about this, I'm remembering another time of my life where I had grief, and I don't remember what the moment was. It could have been around the time around my hair loss and grieving that identity as a woman, which was definitely there was a big part of grief in that. Talking about some of these ways that it comes out in those subconscious. There was a period of time where I would catch myself waking up in the morning and I was curled so tightly. And so in these moments of the subconscious, my body was responding to whatever was happening. So this deep grief. And as I was coming out of it, when I had that first awareness, I remember, oh, I'm hurting. I'm retreating here. And so I started to consciously allow myself to stretch out. And so every time I'd find myself in that little position, I would remember you're in, like, this is I'm giving the words now, but that wasn't my words at the time. It was more of again, a felt sense for me of moving through that in my body. But now the words were, I'm in constriction. So I'm going to stretch my legs. I'm going to reach my arms and I'm going to allow my body to expand back out. And we do that naturally, right? We wake up in the morning and we stretch and expand. But this was a period of time. So it wasn't just a one night that I woke up. This was like, oh my gosh, I'm noticing this is a pattern. I'm moving through something in these nighttime hours, and something is taking me back into the womb. So now, can I acknowledge that there's an emotion behind there? Can I be curious enough to explore it? And then can I get that out of my body and allow myself to actually let things move and flow again?
Dee, I just was really with you there, like feeling, and I think I was just envisioning you, in this moment where you are confronting like all of like what it's going to mean to be a woman and feminine and in the world with no hair, and how in the comfort of your room and your bed at night asleep, you would wake up like in that position, keeping yourself safe, and then having the awareness to unfurl. Like I was thinking of like ferns, like when they're just kind of in their tightness and then unfurling and opening to a new version. a new you. Every morning you did that. I just want to honor you, and you're beautiful, and we love you so much.
Thanks, Meg. Well, and I think it's fascinating because it's, we're all going through this as women in midlife too, middle age. What about grief and the loss of our youth and our beauty? And we're all doing that in different ways. And so I'm actually kind of grateful that I went through it when I did, because I still have some attachments to how I look, obviously. Like that's my, human ego side, but not in the same way that I think if I was going through some of the changes I was going through now, because I had to confront all that stuff. You can only run so far and so long, right? And then if we let it in and we pay attention, then we really do start to not only acknowledge it, but we start to really heal. We don't heal by running away. I learned that the hard way. I tried that. It didn't work very well.
I've just noticed in your journey in the last couple of years how much self-love has flowered in you. And that really, like, that creates safety. And in that safety, there's, well, maybe less grieving. I don't know. It seems to be the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much more acceptance. And I've always said that through acceptance, like, love is so close behind that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I found the self-love, was through really accepting that I was just perfect as I am. Like, none of the hair, none of the like eyelashes, or none of the makeup, none of the like, the weight loss or the weight gain, or like none of that shit, the clothes I wear, the like it's just fucking stuff, and it's all bullshit. And at the end of the day, we can't take it with us, and it doesn't make us happy.
That's right. But I also want to say, with grief, we experience so many endings. And we don't really, again, in our society, we don't really talk about endings. It's always about beginning. It's always about accomplishing and achieving and all those things. We just don't really, we celebrate new beginnings, new years, new birthdays. Like, we celebrate all the things moving forward. We don't really celebrate endings. And so I love that idea of a death meditation. I've never even considered it.
This is also a grief practice. I work with a couple therapists that actually help teach grief practices to, like, process unprocessed grief in your body that lives in our tissues, even our joints, our connective tissue, right? Well, that can be really helpful, a grief practice that you kind of intentionally set aside time or space in your calendar, kind of like breath work. When we do a breathwork practice, we're setting aside an hour and a half to be with our body and our somatic sensations. And if you add a grief practice to that, to be with the somatic sensations and where tension is held in the joints and connective tissue around unprocessed emotional energy, which shame and grief are the heavier ones, that can help them.
I love that, Alina. And we definitely, in the show notes, I think we touched on a couple of really, like, one that really resonated for me that you shared earlier on, Alina, that I think we all lean into, is that beautiful pairing of grief and gratitude. And so no matter what the loss is, if we can return to either the memories that we have, the gratitude for the relationship with the loved one that we might have had, or the loss of, if it's, an experience or like a time of our lives, just appreciating those pieces. We talked a lot about our younger selves today too. And so, can we appreciate those younger parts of ourselves that didn't know, really what grief was looking like, and instead courageously go into those tissues of the body and just allow it to move. And, when it comes back again, like it might, can you just welcome it in and, maybe pull some of that, balm of love that you spread around, put it over that wound and say, hello, old friend.
Mm-hmm.
And know that it too shall pass.
I love the idea of allowing yourself to be in the emotion. And if that means that you are taking a moment to curl up and hold space and feel safe with your own self, that feels resonant for me. And so maybe this idea of just giving yourself permission to be in the safety of your own body in that fetal position, if that feels comfortable, and then unfurling and coming back into your space and stretching and opening. So just allowing yourself to go through those moments feels important. That feels resonant for me. And also keeping the love alive, because when we lose someone, I found a connection, like a spiritual connection with my dad so many years later. So now I think of him when I'm walking in the forest, and I think of him when I get, visitors from the more than human world. So I just want to say and offer that in grief, change, and loss, like it's often because we loved so deeply. If we can keep that love alive in rituals or practices, I just would offer that. It's hard, but it's comforting. So like that salve, like that balm that you speak of, it comforts if we can find ways to keep the love alive.
Lovely. So thanks, listeners, for joining us today as we unpack more feelings and emotions and courageously step into these dark spaces. Thank you for being with us as we go in. And reminders the next time you're feeling deep in your grief, rageful in your anger, or stuck in your fear, remember this balm, this beautiful salve of love.
Yes, spread that love.
Love is the antidote.
Thank you, SoulNet listeners, for tuning in with us and supporting our podcast. We appreciate and love you. Next time, we're going to do a bit of a mashup of some of our favorite moments from our podcast as a way to kick off the summer. So until then, be well.